So this is the Hafco Woodmaster SB-12 table saw. Yeah, pretty excited. Can't wait to get it out of the box, put it all together and start using it. So let's get started. Instructions, they always help, I hope. Oh, that's quite a bit heavy. I think I'll need some help with that. So as you can see, I managed to get the main section out of the box. It was a bit heavy, so I just did that off camera. Don't you love shiny new things? Next step is to get it all together. Here's all my fence sections. There's the table extensions, legs. Let's get on with it. Although I should have worked it out myself, the instructions didn't say anything about putting the inside of the belt guard on first. So let's do that. Put the belt on. There we go. I think that'll work a bit better. Hook up the screws. Lovely. Well, so far so good. No missing screws yet. So where the wings bolt onto the main table of the saw, you have these grub screws right here which help you do a micro adjustment, which is pretty good. If you have a look just here, I don't know if you can see that, that's out just by a little bit. So if we just watch that gap there under the level, as I adjust this little grub screw, see, it brings that table up just to level. So that's pretty good. That's about perfect right there. A really good tip to get that sticky protective coating that they put on these cast iron tops is WD-40. I tried terps and methylated spirits and none of them worked. The WD-40, I sprayed it on, just let it soak for a little while, and used a scourer, like a not a metal scourer, cloth scourer, and got it off no problem whatsoever. So as you can see there, it's lovely and shiny. With these wings, the guide rail, the front guide rail for the fence actually bolts into these holes here in the wings and not on the main table of the saw. So what I did notice was, when after I put the wings on, there's just a slight step there. So what I'm going to have to do is just readjust these wings and bring them forward so that's dead flat across the front there and there as well, so that when I bolt the guide rail on, it won't bow the guide rail. So I'll just get that done. Okay, so I just adjusted these wings off camera. Yeah, and they're perfectly flat across the front there now, there and there. So that's good. I'll be able to put that, the guide rail will sit on there without being distorted now. The only problem that did bring up though was the wings are not exactly the same width or length of the main table. Now with the front adjusted properly, I've ended up with quite a bit of a step here, probably almost a full millimetre. And again, as per the front, the rear guide rail bolts onto the wings. So if I were to bolt that on there as it is, it would bend that rail. So what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to actually shim that out to about a millimetre. So that's what I'm going to have to do with that. Bit of a shame, but yep, we can get around that. So just checking that gap that I've got at the back of the saw with the wings, just using my verniers, and yeah, it's pretty much a 1 millimetre gap. So the closest thing that I could find in my shop that was a millimetre was these red fibre washers. So I'm going to give them a go and see how that turns out. So those fibre washers seem to have done the trick. That's sitting on there level and flat across the whole deck. Okay, so I've gotten the fence and the guide rails all on and tightened up. I did that off camera. It was quite fiddly. It took a little while, not too long, probably about half an hour. So I didn't want to bore you with that on the video, but yeah, it's worked out quite good. I just adjusted the fence to the T-track, put a piece of wood in there, same size as the T-track, and then just brought the fence up against that lock that in place and then lock it in place here. So it's all good. I'm happy with the alignment of the fence. You can see, if I can just show you there as it comes across, that just lines up perfectly with that, so that's good. Just a quick look at the motor rating plate, just showing there that's 3 horsepower. You will notice though that the amp rating is 14 amps. This motor does come with a 15 amp plug, and you will need a 15 amp outlet. My little indicator for the distance was broken in the box, so I'm going to probably have to make another one, which I don't mind actually, because the marking on that is just crap. That red line there is not even a straight line, and it's probably about 1 millimeter thick anyway, so it wasn't accurate. It wasn't going to be accurate. Another thing I wanted to mention just with this fence is one of the features that I liked about it is it locks at the back here as well. So it's got that little foot there that pulls up on this back bar, and then when you tighten up the front it locks at both ends, which is what I wanted. So as you can see, there is no movement in that fence whatsoever. The bottom of the miter gauge was a bit rough, just from the castings, the aluminium castings, and it wasn't sitting very flat on the table. It was a little rocking a little bit. So that was quite easily fixed. I just sat it in the vise, ran over it with a file, a big file, so I could keep it flat, and then just finished it off with a bit of sandpaper on a nice flat surface like this. A couple of passes like that, and now it's dead flat and sits on the table just right. Unfortunately, the fence on this machine isn't the best. Although it's an aluminium extrusion, the face of the fence isn't even flat. You can probably see those, hopefully on the video you can see those gaps there. But if I put that square on the face, it actually rocks backwards and forwards. Quite a bit of, it's probably out by, down the bottom it's probably out by 2 to 3 millimeters, which is pretty bad in my book. And even on the top, if you look at the top, that square rocks back and forward on the top as well. Yeah, as I mentioned before, the little indicator that came with the saw, well, that was already broken in the pack. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make myself a new one. Okay, so as you can see, I just cut that little plastic tab down. I drilled the hole for the mounting screw, and I just used my my marking knife to score a really fine line in the plastic, and as you can see, it's quite visible. And yeah, so that's my new measuring tab. So I've got the guard in place. I didn't do that on video because, to be quite honest, it was very difficult to get on. The guard and the anti-kickback blades and the riving knife are basically all one component. It was put together with these pins and these push nuts, so if you ever wanted to undo the guard or take the guard off for any particular reason, sometimes you need the guard off for, depending on the job that you're doing. As you can see with that, there was no way of getting that off unless you went down inside to the saw where the riving knife, you might not be able to see that, but if you had to go right down inside the saw where the riving knife bolts on the body of the saw, just to remove the guard for particular cuts. So what I did was I took those pins out and replaced it with just a bolt and a nylock nut. So now if I want to remove that guard, it's very simple, a simple job of just removing that nut, pulling that bolt out, and I can take the guard off. And I can take the guard off but still leave the anti-kickback plates in place. So that was a much better solution. So that's one modification that I've made to the guard. The other modification too was the anti-kickback blades were spring loaded. There's the spring. There's the spring there. With that spring in place, those blades were quite aggressive. Actually, they're very sharp, and the spring tension was fairly heavy, but I was concerned if any softwoods were running through those, underneath those blades, that was going to mark them. So what I did, I basically just took the spring out, left the blades in place, and there's enough weight in those blades for them to still rest on the timber as it's running through. So we'll see how that goes. So finally, this is the base plate for the dust collection. That's obviously sits upside down at the bottom of the saw, and as you can see, it's set up for a 4-inch hose. I don't have a 4-inch hose. My system that I use is a 2-inch PVC pipe system. So all I'm going to do is that's a just a standard stormwater fitting, which just happens to fit exactly into that outlet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use that, and I'm going to reduce down to a 50mm or 2-inch pipe. With my whole dust extraction system, it's all PVC pipe. All the pipe fittings are just press fit and held together with duct tape. I find that it works great, it's easy to do, and the biggest advantage of that is I can undo my system anytime I want to make modifications or add something, and all you got to do is undo the tape and pull it apart. Nothing's glued, so it really makes it simple. And that's all it needs. And then I'm just going to reduce it down with one of these, which fits in there perfectly, and just cut down to that step there, which is a 2-inch or 50mm step. Well, the new table saw is all together. The assembly process went really smoothly, no real issues, everything went together nicely, so I was pretty happy about that. Yeah, it's in its final resting spot, I think, for now, all hooked up, and yeah, looking forward to using it and making a few projects.